All right, welcome everyone at the Multi-Network Community Sync. Today is March 22nd, and we're going to continue today on discussion on our API stuff.
Maciej,
Yes.
one question, not a question, just the proposal about how about to update the pull request status of the current submitting.
Oh, sure.
For each.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
And that was my first question. If you have any other topics to discuss before we jump to the API discussion, please free to jump in. Yeah, let me. So there was a lot of comments coming from Dan Winship. I addressed all of them, updated the cap so that it's better reflected, and he had very good pointers on what we wanted to do and how the kind of form of the cap should look like. So there was a few tweaks I did here and there. I am trying to push from my side on team to review this as well, and my goal is to get it kind of merged. I would appreciate anyone else from this group as well review it again if there is something that's not okay. But currently, we are in the just waiting game for someone to sit down and review it. Um, I haven't pushed it like for the last few weeks because there was a Kubernetes release. So currently, most of the folks reviewers were busy with the cap reviews, and now the change reviews for the next release of Kubernetes. This cap is not really what I want to say is not so important that it has to fit any of those kind of releases. So I haven't pushed for it, but till then. But now I think that code freeze is done. I think so. Now we are good to. I am pushing that to gonna get that review.
Is the link to the cap that's on top of this page updated?
Yes, exactly. That's true. Here,
to the right
PR.
one.
This is the PR. Yes.
Okay.
So this doc requirements
should be so that should be reviewed then.
Yes. So the requirements doc is out there. It's closed for reviews, and I can see in the red. I'm saying to go to PR and comment on PR right now. All the development and comments right now is done through the PR for the requirements gap. So please look at that and give it a read if you can look at it again. If there's some other gaps, let me know. Any other topics anyone wants to kind of touch on before we jump to the API stuff? Then let's
sorry, one question about process. So we're talking about API. It's been very much about pod network and about how the pod is going to change. I realized reading through it that I haven't seen anything about how any of the other resources changed. Is the plan that we're going to get pod network worked out and then go back and fill in some of the other resources and how they'll change?
So Pete, look at the requirements cap. My proposal there is to, and something that you saw last week, last 2 weeks ago, I was showing in the roadmap. We are phasing out the whole thing. So our phase one is all about just defining the API and being able to reference that in the pod, and that's it. Let's figure that one out. Later on, we're gonna look at other resources. What do you have in mind? Maybe I will start that.
Yeah. So I'm reviewing this. I don't see any issues yet. I'm just thinking. Oh, the reason I'm interested in this is that we've got some slightly weird use cases that haven't even got teams to properly write down for me in full detail from our side about things like SRIOV and NUMA attachments and so on, and how is it all going to be possible to do this through what we're defining now. So I'm trying to build in my head a picture of, are we going to have the right information available to do all those things? Now, I suspect the reality is we will. I mean, there's two ways you could imagine handling that. One is to do some prototyping now, and I think that might be a sensible thing to do in parallel for us to do. The other way to handle it is to say, well, we will put down what we think we need, and then as later on we might need further information or further capabilities, we might extend things.
So again, I think, just to be more clear, the requirements cap as well includes all the use cases and all the requirements that we want to handle through this effort. So,
Yep.
And I want to get it merged so that we don't get distracted. I know folks can come in and at the various times of points of this effort, and I don't want to get distracted by, okay, now did we thought about this or that? And then I would say, no, stop the discussion, go to this doc, and this is what we are covering. All right, so we are still, Pete, you are still in good point where you can add your comments into that cap. And when
Yep.
it's merged, that's it. That will be my always response to any attempt to, did we thought about those use cases? I would say, no, that's something is already defined. This is the cap, and this is what we are focusing only on. So please read that cap and see what's missing, and if it's covering to most of your use cases, and the requirements are there as well, and the phasing that I mentioned is there as well. All right.
Yep. Okay.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, let me jump to the share this tab. And maybe Pete, because that's what other objects you had in mind beside pod, like services, network policies, all those, or
Yeah,
something else?
services is the one that came to mind.
Yeah.
Um,
So this is something that we're probably gonna touch on next year. That's
Right.
how the phasing going in. So that's phase, I think, 3, where we are going to talk about supporting on services and network policy. So there is quite a long way till then. Okay.
Yeah, the other example I can think of where, like I said, I don't have a hard requirement here or anything, is when we add things to pod, it is not just what network they're in, but potentially what parameters they need to be provided and so on. And I'm trying to get my head around whether we've got enough flexibility in here. So
Sure.
I guess we're
Alright.
at the right stage of that now.
Yeah. I think as we're gonna discuss, you will see. I have an example below that's gonna probably show you what I have in mind. So let's maybe go through the finalize the spec, and I have some example over there to kind of, maybe I can just show you that so that you can. I created an example here, how I would imagine this would look like. Sorry, folks, I borrowed Multus as an example. I'm not sure, is that okay or not? Hope not. Hope it is okay. So what I would imagine is something like that, where a network object with very basic, what IPAM I want to do. And in this case, I'm assuming I'm going to use external, because in my network attachment, in my NAT, I'm going to use whereabouts. So I don't care about any of Kubernetes attachment of IPAM. I'm going to do externally done IPAM done by whereabouts. This is just pointer to the object. And here my provider Multus saying that, okay, this whole object is handled by Multus and nobody else should touch it. That's how, and that doesn't have to be like this. This is just my example. Probably the Multus effort is going to figure out something correct, but that's how basically an example of how that would look like is. Tomo?
Yeah, just a comment that so in my net attach definition case, this is the namespace object. So maybe you also need to add.
Oh yeah, I missed that. Yeah,
mention
good,
the
fair point.
namespace.
Yeah, let me.
And
let me
also
get
the in additions, so CRD is have the namespace object and cluster wise. So maybe we need to double check that params_ref have the namespace is supported, and also the which is support the cluster object. I'm not good at the parameter ref field. I mean,
so cluster object can reference namespace objects quite fine. Just a matter of your controllers that will handle this object having the full permissions to either look at namespace object and look at the other namespaces, right? So that's quite kind of straightforward. And there shouldn't be any issues, right? You point out to the specific, to a specific just namespace and just read that, right? And then you handle it accordingly in your controller. So, and that's a good point, Tomo, and that's a good example, even better, because now, yes, having a cluster-wide object referenced here, it's easy. How about namespace? Yeah, we can do that as well. And this is all the parameters ref. There is a standardized field so that have all those options. So that's how this would look like. I think this was in the params ref, and I think I have it here. It's groups, kind, name, and namespace. All those fields are here. I think namespace in this case is optional. So all the other pieces are kind of mandatory. Then just strings. The one thing you have to specify those kind of type on how you specify the values, but those are defined by your CRD, whatever you define. Yeah. The question, Per?
Oh, sorry, I'm typing.
No. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Is that kind of clear? Tomo, you had a hand, or that just from previous?
Just the
No.
previous one.
Okay. All right. I see my comment here on the provider. I haven't done this one. I will write it down, but from our last discussion, just to quickly remind that provider, it's a signal for the implementation side, and it says whether I am to use this object or not, and it's up to the as well implementation of how they behave when this object is not provided, right? Am I kind of eager in this case, or just read everything if it's not if it specifies for me and when it's not present, or do I require provider to be always specified? So that's something that implementation has to identify, whether they how they treat this and respect this provider field.
So,
all right.
hey, I hate to rewind it here, because I know you said that we stopped at the provider field, so maybe we already covered this in the last section, but in the last session, that is. But with IPAM 4 versus IPAM 6, is it necessary to split them into two? Can we just have IPAM?
So what about so today we don't have that option, right? Today in Kubernetes, we don't have option to separate the two and to identify what I want to do for specific family. And I can have I would imagine I have a case where, okay, V4 just do it standard via standard cases, but for V6 do me a Slack or something and do it through external means. So I want to have the flexibility to distinguish what I want to do for a specific family.
It could be, like I say, it could be Slack and route advertisement for V6.
Yeah, exactly. So and clamping that together, I'm telling you, I see from ours, from our internal use cases, that this is something that we would want to have as well, where, okay, I want to kind of distinguish them, and so we don't have that capability today on the KCM today when we do that by just the default for the default network, right? We don't have the capability of splitting, and it's not very clear on what is being done. This is very straightforward, and it's per family what I'm doing, right? You see that, Doug? Or did I not convince you?
I'm not totally convinced yet. I guess the thing I'm thinking about is it.
Oh, there is another aspect to this.
Yeah.
The other aspect to this is now I specify what IPs I want. You see, I can have a explicit identification of, okay, I want IP4, I want dual stack, so I specify both, or I want IP6 only. So my network has a direct identification of what IP families I care about. Or I don't specify neither, then I don't care about any IPs. I just do L2 or I just do PCI through a PCI pass-through or something, and I don't care about IPs. This interface will never have an IP.
Okay,
But-
so all right, I guess I see that. So it can be
Yeah.
optional, and then it's whatever. It's an L2, for example.
Yeah.
That definitely makes sense. I'm coming around to it. I mostly, there's part of me that thinks, yeah, I guess I'm all right with it. I was just wondering if it could be collapsed just to simplify. But
I think the reasoning behind like being able to identify which case I want out of the 4, right? Because I can have specific version of the family or dual stack or none, right? So now I have a capability to explicitly specify that, right? Explicitly say, I want dual stack, I want V4, I want V6, or I don't want anything. Unless the other option for that would be, okay, let's collapse those and have another flag stating, I don't know, IP family or something like that, right? Where I can explicitly say, okay, I want V4, I want V6, I want none, something like that. There could be another field for that, right? But I think having those two, since those serve as the kind of capability of IPAM, what sort of IPAM, they can as well specify and serve as what sort of families I care, right? In this network. I'm not sure who was.
I think it's, yeah, I think it's nice to know about. The thing that I think might be funny when you're lofting it to another implementation, like, so when you've got the like external example,
Mhm.
is you've got to have both fields to say it's dual stack, and then it's like IPAM 6 external, IPAM 4 external.
Right. And I have the capability to specify that, right? Because that means because there is another aspect to this. This will then drive the requirements from your implementation. I expect both IPs from this from the CNI, or I expect just one IP or none. That's what this will drive towards, right? Because otherwise, if your implementation doesn't provide those, I should fail. That's how I would imagine later on. That's kind of how would this behave, where, okay, you specify this network. So I expect for this interface, I expect this many IPs, regardless of.
So well, and that's interesting too, I guess, because like okay, your IPv6 and like to Pear's example, it's Slack, it's maybe you have multiple IPv6 addresses. Maybe you have multiple IPv4 addresses. So I'm not sure that, so for yeah, I
think
I
this
think
doesn't
that it's
cover
nice
the.
to express and the, go ahead, sorry.
This will not cover the case where you say multiple IPs. Right now, let's talk about just single IP, and I wouldn't want to go and discuss that case. For now, this I would assume at least one IP, right? And probably when we're gonna talk about status, about how you report status, and this is where we're gonna talk about pods and now the status says, this is when we probably have to get into that discussion. But yeah, maybe I won't divulge more.
Can we stop here so we can comment? Tom was before me, but I think we both have comments here, so we just don't.
Yeah, sure. Tomo, go ahead.
Yeah, one question. Yeah, regarding IPAM 4 and IPAM the 6. So I have the two stuff. The one is the clarification. So if the usual case, I mean that the dual stack in the one IPAM, at that time the user should specify the both or not. And then next section, the question is about the what how do I say? Maybe this is just comment. Please add the comment what the optional means. This is just left the default or just the disable. I mean that IPAM 4 is the not added. This means that this cluster, this port network only cares about IPv6, not only the port network IP, also the service or some belonging network functionality is disabled.
Yeah, that's a fair point to kind of mention about the yeah. Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
think,
Igor.
I mean, since Ed is not here, but I think we're mixing together the for the layer 2 properties and the layer 3 properties of a network. I mean, on a layer 2, we look at V6, I can have as many layer 3 networks as I want. Or I can just sort of have a normal Ethernet. I think that's what Ed called it. It calls Ethernet and IP, right? So it's really about the service you want to offer. And I would say that if I offer a V6, if I offer an IP service, then I can sort of describe it. So say, oh, there is one IP network on there. Maybe I can then say I want several IP networks. And it's really up then to the implementer if he decides, especially with V6, to run them over the same physical L2 or not. So I think there's a little assumption that this is to me, it looks like a cluster network, the cluster network we have today. When it
So
comes
I will concur on that one, saying, okay, I would have multiple. So what you said, I can have multiple L3 networks on single in L2. Then you create multiple pod networks representing each of those subnets, and then you say,
that's really the question.
It will boil down to how you implement and how I can pipe in those things, right?
I
And how your pod is going to handle that. If you have a daemon set, some agent that, okay, I say that this pod will have those 5 networks, and then I just when I kick it off, I don't have to create multiple physical interfaces inside the pod, because like the most implementation imagines that and does that, right? Will create separate interface pipeline into that. But in your implementation, that can mean I will create multiple IPs on that single interface. It can be just that. And this boils down to your implementation, right?
So what I think what I'm saying is like let's just call them L2 or L3 or Ethernet and IP. I think you need to have 2 different objects at the service level to describe a Ethernet type of service and an IP type of service. I don't think you want to try to cram all of that into the same network.
Why would you care about Ethernet?
Oh, that's an L2. That's what we have today. And if you look at multi-cert stuff, it's really a flat L2 because I have pods that use Ethernet that runs ISIS or some other protocol that is not IP.
I would imagine that still.
You have someone that wants to run LLDP. You want to have something that runs LACP. There's many protocols that are not IP based, right? That's
not IP based.
Yeah.
Then what you in your case, and again, that will mean that you don't specify that, right? I agree on this one that we are locking here ourselves that you expect it's an Ethernet connection, right? I think I'm not sure whether we should support something else, right? So then if it doesn't have an IP, you don't specify any of those.
So what I'm scared of sort of is that what I said before, if I want to have an Ethernet type of sort of L2, then it needs to be a flat network, right? I need a broadcast domain basically for an IP network. It can be delivered through a hierarchy of networks and routing and so on. And since I wanted IP, I don't really care about what the underlying topology is. It can be a flat L2 that is delivered over, or it can be a routing tree or something like that. I don't care because I want IP connectivity. But if I want Ethernet connectivity, then I want to have something that what we would use today, right? That you would use Multus to load up one network. Is not built from several. There's no way really to describe that.
No, so it is. That's so. Keep in mind this is very simple. Why you will not be able? So L2 or whether L3, and neither of those fields identify what type
I'm
of
saying
network
is that,
it is.
So if I'm the user and I want to have an L2, I need the provider needs then to understand so that there needs to be a way to present that this is a flat network.
I would imagine it will be done through the parameters reference. I don't think we should, because what you're asking now to kind of give,
no.
identify whether it's an L2 or L3. And I say no, because we define that kind of parameters. I can have an implementation that only does L2, and I don't care about the other one. Or you're going to have implementation that's going to have both. So what I'm saying is, I'm offloading this to this parameters reference, where
we're back to the normal, and it's fine that I'm used to create networks. You assume that the network is there and it's just shown to the user.
and this is what it's going to be, right?
No, so that's fine. That's fine. I'll back off. I'm talking more about the attributes needed towards the orchestration system that would create this network.
Yeah, and I agree, but this is what I'm saying. You have the parameters ref that can handle that, right? So that's why.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
In this level, I think this is.
I have to try. If I don't feel it, if there's nothing there, I have to trust that it's an Ethernet. But still, the problem is sort of if someone has. So the thing is this: if there is a network and someone has filled in the V4 and V6 IPAM there, that there are. How do if I just want to use an Ethernet network? How do I know if I can use this network or not? I don't, because I don't know. So I don't know if this
It's
network can be used.
Up to your cluster
Internet service.
administrator, right? Your cluster
Oh.
administrator is the one that's going to handle this.
No, it's like I'm the one that's going to consume this. So I look at it. Okay,
Yes.
you fill in IPAM 4 and IPAM 6. So I know I can use it for L3. That's fine.
Mhm.
But can I also use it for as an Ethernet network?
Okay, so
There's
then
no-
I will go
there's
to,
no way-
I go to my provider. I see what is the provider. I know then we pushing if from that use case, what you just described, we are putting more effort onto the user to kind of, okay, go to see what is the provider and see what are the parameters references.
Yeah, but
If there's a provider and provider supports one specific
are they
type of network.
standardized? Are they standardized? What's in the
No.
provider?
No,
No, so then
provider,
I can't.
what's a provider? But that's we if we were to have the full description over here, that's I don't want to go that far because now that's gonna just bloom out.
If we would say we have two service types, Ethernet and IP, then it would be very simple to implement. I mean, to include that is, can this network be used for Ethernet? Can it be used for IP?
Is there
I
a,
think
is there a way we can capture this, like these problems and stuff like that and kind of get it into something written? Like, is there a better forum for this? I'm just curious. I just thought I'd kind of butt in. 'Cause
We have the Slack channel, right?
maybe somewhere not in Slack.
This,
like
I think
somewhere in
we have.
Git.
Yeah, we don't.
I think I brought it up. I would say
well,
that.
we had some discussion last.
And I already promised to do sort of layout pictures of typical cluster networks, right? I'll come back with some pictures for next
All right.
meeting, so we can continue.
Per, you have other doubts? Okay, can we, or do you want to?
No.
we can-
I said I'm done. As I said, I'll come back next.
Okay,
I'll do the pictures and I'll start up
Okay.
something on the. So I'm sorry, but
any other questions to the IPAM stuff?
I think there's a good convo. It just seems like we need to get it captured somewhere. So thanks.
All right, let's going to the next field in the last one in the object, and this was just straightforward copied from Multus, and this is all about just stating giving some sort of access permissions. Maybe this is something that not how it should be done. We in our requirements we said this is going to be done through an attach verb that we were thinking of to add. But I think this then it might not be necessary, right? Because if we have that, then RBAC will handle all this for us. Anyone has other opinions, Tomo?
So as you previously mentioned in the old document, you are come up with the using the RBAC with some special verb. So if we still thinking about using the RBAC, this row namespace is redundant.
Yeah,
I see.
I think so as well. Yeah, let me just get rid of that. Anyone has other opinions here? Nope. All right, silence as an acceptance.
Yeah, so
All
we
right.
need, so sorry, I was on mute. We need to bring in this discussion around what happens. Because this is only checked, right, when you do the action. So let's say that you would change the rules after something has been set up. We also need to point that this needs to be checked either in the kubeless/cryo or by each CNI. We had a discussion already at the.
So I think you're referring to mutability. I think
No,
as well.
no. So if I had a write, so this is only checked when I do the action. When I want to set, sort of say, oh, I want to mount this. When you do the
Okay.
spec work, right? That's when the RBAC is checked. Okay. Now you change the rule and say that this pod cannot access this network anymore. But
Oh,
that's only the API server. Now you're going to run the actual attach, which is today done by CNI. But that rule needs to be checked then again. Is he allowed? I mean, you have
how do we what you're asking for
So-
to better? How do we enforce removal
Yeah,
of
exactly.
access?
So we had long discussions on Slack before, and we had it at the KubeCon as well. We even discussed it with the CRI guys. I think it was that said that this should be done by us. So it's done in one place and not spread
Yeah.
out on
True.
all CNIs.
Let me do this. Let me.
I think you were in the
open-
room then.
Right. Tomo, you had a hand?
Oh, this is just the previous one, but also the the maybe I understand. And let me double check that you are trying to introduce the new verb, not the get put, and then also the something which allows to exactly use this stuff, right? Okay. Maybe let's talk about that. Double check in the later in the RBAC stuff.
Yeah. Before. Yep. Any other? I think the next thing I want to go into is the status of the object. But before there, I think is this very simple. I see this is quite simple, and I'm happy about this. Anyone has other comments, like general comments, or anyone sees gaps? Are we missing something here? I will, let's not maybe, if anything, please, link is in the doc. If you have some other comments, leave them and we can talk through comments if you see, unless you know now, then let us know. If not, then just reread this again and look at this object and see if something's missing.
You took away the routes, right? But didn't we discuss to have not the actual routes, but which routes this network object would sort of which address scopes that can be that will be routed through this network or have routes for. I mean, that you would be able to see that. Okay, this one.
So this assumes L3 network then.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
And that's network specific implementation, right? So that will have to go into your parameters if you want to control that, or into your implementation, which would discover what sort of CIDR it is, and then apply that into.
In that case, you could say the same thing about IPAM, right?
Yeah, and it is. So not exactly, because IPAM today is handled for the default network. We have IPAM handled by the default for the default network. So this is, I'm copying only that piece. If I'm doing it or someone else is doing it, I'm not saying how it's done. I'm not saying what CIDR it is. I'm just saying how who is doing it. That's the single only information I'm saying, because what I'm trying to say is, and what I'm trying to get as well, keep in mind that this object eventually should represent the existing default network. This object has to do that, right? So whatever we have there, it should represent that part. And that's something that that we have to have, right? So KCM today, we have a KCM that in the arguments in the KCM, you can Kubernetes cluster control manager. You specify whether you want to have the IPAM controller enabled or not for that network. And that's all, of course, global for just this default network, but it's there. And basically, this is what exactly this translates to. This is the same thing. Okay. With additional caveat where, and the caveat being, I can specifically say what IP families I care, and there's another option which it's not present in KCM, and that's that I don't have to specify anything, right? So I can have an option where IPAM it doesn't have to be present on a network. And I assume this will not apply, and maybe that's a good point. This will not, I always have to have something for default pod network always has to have one defined, because we don't support no IP on the default network.
I agree. And we also agree that it's an IP network.
Yes.
Yes.
A comment here, so can't remember that. Okay. So for that point, that's, I think, the bare minimum. So default network probably, depending on who's implementing it, it might not have even this parameters ref, but it might. I'm not sure. Probably it can. And then the provider, that's just optional. Probably for the default network, it should be, or maybe no, it has to be specified or something. Yep, I envision eventually that's how it's going to be. Like you will have a cluster, and there will be no default network in it because it expects like today, cluster won't come up when CNI is not there, and we'll have a proper Kubernetes object which can specify, okay, now this is the default network. It's going to be looking like this, right? And today this is just done by kind of indirectly through the CNI, whichever you enable, and the single one that you enable. But with this, we can specify, okay, I want to have that type of default network in my cluster, and do it, right? So keep in mind that we have to kind of describe the default interface with this one as well.
Yeah.
The default network.
Yeah.
All right. The parameters reference, I think this is kind of straightforward. Or are there any other comments to this? I think this is just describe and standard. I think this is standard. I copied from some, I think, gateway API or something. This is the reference to another object in Kubernetes, so I think it handles all the possible cases. All right, and the last thing is the status of the network. As you can probably saw in my example, what I want to do is introduce conditions into this object. And through conditions, this is the standard conditions that we have in pods and every other Kubernetes objects. I want to introduce two types, ready, and another one is params ready. Those conditions would identify API side of readiness. Keep that in mind. This is only for the API side of readiness, where all the parameters are present, they are correct for my implementation. So I have a provider defined here. Provider X has to look at the object and say, yep, everything's fine with this object, no misspelling, no nothing. I would set the ready flag. And this is only for that. This is not for pod to say, it will eventually, but it's not to say that, oh yes, this network is available on all the nodes. No, this ready is because it's a centralized point. We cannot have a per node information about status of that network on this object. So this readiness is only about the API side of readiness. I'm not sure I'm clear around
Okay,
that.
so it's not admin state or op state if you look.
Yes.
That
Yes, exactly. That's not it.
That would be more on the attachment. We would have that.
But it kind of is a bit as well, because if I misspell something here or I'm missing some parameters, it will say the network is ready, and your implementation should appropriately react to say, okay, this network is not available on my nodes because the core object is not ready for whatever reason, and that reason might be you misspelled something. But it's still, you shouldn't try to implement this network or handle this network because there is some mistake in the API, right? So kind of it is what you're saying. It is in a case where if ready is false, I cannot touch that, right?
No,
That's
it's okay. But it's like, let's go with your thought. So the ready there means that you can communicate with the API server about this network, right? I mean, you, of course, you have asked for status before, so you know something about it, so you can go to the next thing, and that there's no sort of state about the actual network behind. I mean, I mentioned routes before, but I mean, basically up, down, that would be somewhere else, and I think that's
yes,
that's
yeah.
fine.
So the future, like if you were to, yeah, this object doesn't have capability of stating down this network. I don't think that's something that we want to. It's
No,
like on the switch,
even,
right?
even the status if it's up or down, right?
Yeah, and there is that because that part is done on per node basis. It's not done on a per cluster basis. That's the difference.
And then you, like I said, then you get to the actual attachment
Yeah,
of the interface. You should be able to sort of see that.
yeah, and depending on how you implement, and it can be implemented in various ways, as you said.
And I
Like-
think you already said it implicitly. Sort of the owner of the network has another way to bring down the whole network.
Has to have
Because
that.
the operator part of it, but so that means that you shouldn't be able to change the add-in state of the network. Should be able to report it somewhere, and sort of that also, of course, drives the op status of the specific interface on a specific node based
Yeah.
on things that are outside of this. Yeah, that I'm good with.
Tomo? Tomo, you have a hand. You want you muted if you speak.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, now yes.
So I have the questions or comments. The one comment is about this network status seems to be the how do I say, kind of the not about the check the ready or some stuff. I mean that the valid or invalid stuff. So maybe we should use this not ready or the not ready. I mean that the ready
Accepted.
seems to be the network is ready, but so the so the yeah, maybe the I'm thinking that the ready is not the is not good to fit in this context because the user may misunderstanding the network is ready. I mean that. So that this network is ready so that we can sending the we can launching the pod and sending the packet. But so that this ready is not the ready for pod network. This is the you mean as it mentions. This is the these parameters of the API is the valid.
So I think the other and I rely here on more experienced Kubernetes API in this room in this meeting. I think the other, because I'm trying to reuse one of the kind of types that are existing. So the other one that I'm aware of is accepted. We can just use that instead of ready, right? So this one would be accepted.
Okay, yeah, maybe accepted seems to be the
and
more.
maybe I will get to. So okay, thank you. My explanation, at least my explanation of what I mean by behind this one is fine. But what I'm want to add is want to go, and maybe then we can revisit what should be the naming be. Want to go to the next one. The next condition type would be params ready. And this one, as you can think of, this is to identify that my parameters are ready. Why I want to have that, and then what will be the use case. So this condition would be required and will be conditioned, will condition the first one if the params are set. So if my params reference is a non-nil field, so someone specifies parameters ref, my object expects from the implementation to provide a params ready condition on this object. Until then, I will say my object is accepted false. So that's why where's the difference between ready and accepted comes into Tomo, where accepted, I would imagine accepted is just for that specific object, right? Readiness or acceptance just for like I do a webhook kind of thing, right? So I say accepted, I accept this object because it looks good, I'm fine with it. But then that's why I want to use ready, because then ready identifies additionally that, okay, you additionally specified parameters reference, and your implementation now has to say, are those correct? And then if they are correct, send it back and tell me here in this object so that I can say, yes, this whole network is now ready to use. That's why that's why I named it ready, not accepted, because at that point, if we say this ready is dependent on that params ready, then I would prefer name it ready because it has additional kind of meaning here. And maybe before we go there, let's maybe first on the aspect of what I said on this additional condition. Any comments on that? Is that something that is valid, or you see that's not necessary, having the params ready?
So the yes, your reply also following some question about the how to say, who should update this stuff?
All right, so ready is the responsibility of the core. So as a KCM probably, or wherever we're gonna have a controller for the network object, is going to be responsible for just checking basic parameters here, and then do additional logic around parameters ref. If you have them specified, I expect a params ready condition type to be in place. And now, so that's how the ready is going to be handled. Now the params ready is the responsibility of the implementation. All right, so if I have an object and there is a additional reference and the provider is, let's say its provider is Multus now, right? So I would expect Multus to validate the parameters reference. And if it's okay, come back to this network and say, and apply this params ready condition. And the responsibility for that condition will be the implementers. So that will be a contract between if you want to specify additional parameters reference, right? Where your implementation has to come back to the network that references it and state that yes, parameters are proper and they are configured and everything's ready. And then I can come back to the network and say, yes, everything's set up. The other, you can look at it from the other point. If parameters, let's say, have, let's say they might have, this is an SROV configuration, right? And behind the whole parameters ref states, I want to have a set of VFIO based VFs. So what this will mean is I will configure the whole thing, and your implementation, the SRV operator can say, or it's gonna have to be probably go through Multus, but you will have everything configured. And as soon as only at the point where SRV operator is fully completed, when it applied the VFIO stuff for me, configured all the VFs, when that's only completed, then only then I come in here and say everything's ready. You can do that. You don't have to, because that's kind of beyond just the API stuff. But the SRV operator is centralized, so you could condition your readiness of the network based on whether some stuff is configured in the cluster, right, for this network.
So this means
that gives you the control and flexibility.
So that this, how to say, it makes the this semantics is vague. So the first time they use saying that the pop network status is about API's the status. I mean that this API
that part,
is not. But
yes.
today in the future, but you also describing that this network status is not only the API, this also the whole network API. The
but
readiness.
What I'm saying here, Tomo,
so maybe,
because
so, okay,
no,
let's summarize. So the first, please describe the you mentioned you what you're saying. So currently the condition is the ready and the params ready. So you need to describe what does it mean, and then also you need to describe which component this cap expects which component updating these conditions. And in addition, at least to me the first time that you mentioned that ready is just the API readiness. So in this case, once this is explained, then it seems to be the makes sense. But it's not, so therefore it's not intuitive. I mean that the user is just a user. I mean that they just have the several experiment in the current Kubernetes. At that time, once this user seeing network is ready, and then let's imagine what they think about that. So this is a little bit just the comments. So sometimes there are someone may misunderstanding network. Port network status is ready means not the network ready, is not intuitive. Maybe that someone is naturally thinking port network status is ready means network is ready because this is ready, right? So maybe we need to. I'm just
because
thinking
Tomo,
I'm just worried that these situations happen. So they are.
So today, Tomo, I think in phase 2, where we have that selective availability of a network to look at. Right now, we are not saying that. So right now, what we are saying, every network has to be available on all the nodes of your cluster. That's the phase 1 only doing that. So if that is the case, what it means is it can mean exactly what you're saying, at least on the first phase, because in the phase 2, we're going to look at this as generic readiness of the network object versus availability of that network object per node. Okay. Today, we are not looking at the second part. There is no per node availability of this network. That's something that we're going to look at next year. So right now, it's just global readiness of this object, and basically it should mean that yes, I could start and use that and reference that in my pod, because there is no per node availability defined today, and we are not looking at it at this point. We're gonna look at it later on in the future. So,
but also yeah, I understood the per node network availability will be described in the future at the next phase. But so yeah, I'm just talking about the network ready means the not sometimes the cluster network, right?
Mhm.
The whole network. At that time, I'm just imagining that this ready
I think
terms is not intuitive. That's it. So if we come up with there's some good words and then it's good, and then sometimes it's not, it's okay. But so that maybe there's some user will filing the issue once this is a G8. This is just a concern.
this is the description of the Tomo. Read through those. I think that was just quickly what I wrote down. Please read through those and hope to describe of the conditions. But to my example, previous with the SRV, this is of course implementation side. This is where I'm abstracting. For this network object, it is still API based only. And then how you define what's behind params ready, it's up to the implementation. And that's what I'm saying. They can go crazy and assume readiness of the network will be gated on whether I configure something in a cluster, or I don't care about anything of this. I will just validate that my params ready specified here is correct syntax wise only, and then report back, okay, my network is ready and my params ready is true, and then just to unlock the other things. So then it's up to the implementation on how they want to gate things. That's what I'm getting at. I want to give that power for the implementation to gate this object. That's, I think, what it boils down to. And this will be a nice API, a nice standardized interface to do this. I know it might be a bit complicated for what you're saying, if I see whether network is ready or not, but I think it will be exactly that, right? I look at the network, I see ready, true, then I say, okay, I can reference this network in my workloads. That's what it means. And the other thing will be availability of that network across the nodes, which then will be handled later on. But for now, I see the network ready. Okay, I should be able to reference it and it should work. Or the network ready is false, and I see on the comments parameters ready not present. So then I look, I don't have this condition. What's happening? I see the params reference is there. Or the provider who's implementing this. So I go to that provider and look at what's the deal. Why didn't that guy provided me params ready condition? That's how would I kind of see all this behaving. All right, I think we are at the time. Any other comments to this? I think we can stop it here. Please digest this. Leave any comments here or come back next time to kind of have more discussion around this. I think this is and maybe there are other ideas of what types we can have in this condition. Yep, and that's it. Any other last notes? If not, then thank you, everyone. I will stop record.
Thanks.